Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Herr Jesu Christ, ich schrei zu dir, which translates to, Lord Jesus Christ, I cry to you. This is a pretty straightforward chorale. There's some interesting information about this measure right here that I did some reading on, which I'll get to when we talk about it. But more or less, this chorale pretty much functions the way that we would expect it to harmonically. There are a couple of interesting twists and turns, but like I said, I'll talk about them when they are, when we're there. So let's just hop right into the analysis. So, 2 flats in the key signature. We start on G minor. We end on G major. I reckon we're in the key of G minor. We move to, and actually before we get started, we have a perfect authentic cadence in the key of G minor here. We then have C, C, E flat, and G, which is a root position C minor triad, which is our 4, D, A, D, and F sharp, which is a root position D major triad, which is 5. Apologies, I'm going back here and I misread that chord. That's actually C, A, E, and G, which is A minor 7 flat 5. That's 2, 6, 5. You know that Bach loves his 2, 6, 5 chords. And then we get kind of an interesting chord. We have E natural, G, D, and G. This was kind of an interesting chord because I'm going to call it 6 because of the fact that E is definitely the root of this chord. But what this chord is missing is a 5th, which is what would turn it into a diminished triad, at least as its foundation is concerned. But this should be a minor 7 flat 5 chord. We'll go ahead and just call it that because that's what's being implied. The fact that we have 2 G's is interesting. One of these voices, to fully contextualize the chord, would need to be B flat, but take that with a grain of salt. We then have F sharp, D, C, and A, which is D7 over F sharp. That's 5, 6, 5. And then we go to G minor, G, D, B flat, and B flat, which is our tonic triad in root position. We have a couple of passing tones in the inner voices before we get D major again, D, F sharp, D, and A, which is our 5 chord, passing 7th in the alto, and then we cadence on our tonic G minor, G, G, B flat, and G, tripled root, 1/3. Alright, our next phrase ends with a half cadence in the key of G minor, so no modulation just yet, although there might be a little bit of an argument that there is some visitation to B flat in this area, but I don't think it's enough. Everything's sort of just woven together, so I think it might just be visiting the relative major rather than fully modulating. So we get another G minor chord on the next beat, G, B flat, D, and G, with a passing tone in the alto. And then we get an interesting chord. We get F major, F, C, F, and A, which would be an uppercase 7, a flat 7 chord. And some people analyze this as 5 of 3. They both go to the same place, but sometimes one implies a little bit more than another. And I think maybe 5 of 3 is even a little bit more appropriate in this situation because of everything that's going on in the inner voices. We have a passing 7th in the bass, and then we get D, D, F, and A. However, even though you might be tempted to call this a minor 5 chord, maybe, I don't really think that's what's happening here. I think we have this D right here being an accented non-chord tone, as well as this D right here, and they fan outwards by step. So we actually get C, E flat, F, and A, which makes me think that really what's happening is just the chord is being inverted and the 7th is being added. So with the C in the bass, that would be a 7-4-3 chord, or a 5-4-3 of 3. And the reason why I think that's what's happening here is because the trajectory of this chord actually arrives at B flat major, B flat, F, B flat, and D. So it arrives at 3 eventually. And then we skip up to D here on the and of 3, which technically inverts the chord to first inversion. And then we get our ascending melodic minor in the bass. So we have E, C natural, B flat, and C, which would be like a C7 chord without the 5th, and that's okay. and it would be in first inversion. So that'd be like a 4-6-5, which is pretty analogous to 6-7. They're more or less accomplishing the same thing. But then we get some passing tones here, or some delayed non-chord tones. We get F sharp, D, A, and C, which is another 5-6-5 chord happening at the end of the phrase. So just the harmonic rhythm's been subdivided here, but a very similar progression to what's happening in the first complete measure of the first phrase. Then we get G minor, or he kind of alludes to G minor. We have some counterpoint going on because we have G, G, and B flat, but we have an A here, and that's surely a 9/8 suspension over the bass. But when it resolves, then you look at the bass goes up to A, and then it's like a 9/7, which is really interesting. So this G is definitely our chord tone. This A is a passing tone, or it's just an interruption with the suspension. This F sharp right here is enclosing this G. So I think one is definitely being implied here, but the counterpoint muddies the analysis. And then we get B flat, D, G, and B flat, which is just taking the tonic triad and inverting it. We get another passing tone in the bass, and then we cadence on 5, D major in root position, D, D, F sharp, and A. Okay, next phrase, we have a perfect authentic cadence in the key of G minor. However, I think we go there via B flat major. So I think we have a direct modulation here to B flat, just because of the fact that it ends the phrase, and D major is not diatonic to the key of B flat, so it is more abrupt than anything else. You could say that this is a common chord, but this whole phrase sounds like it's in the key of B flat. And it doesn't really feel like it's related harmonically to the previous phrase, at least via elisions, so I don't think that they're connected via a common chord. This just sounds like a new statement. So we have F, B flat, D, and D, which is a second inversion B flat major chord, which is interesting. We typically wouldn't see them used in this context, but then we get G, E flat, B, and D, which is kind of like a passing 4-7 chord, but I don't really think it matters too much. It's too fleeting. And then we get A, C, F, and C, which is a first inversion F major chord, which is 5-6 in the key of B flat. And then we get G, B flat, E, and B flat, which is an E diminished chord over G. That would be 7-6 of 5. And then we get F major in root position, F, C, F, and A. Really common chord progression for Bach, where he'll, over 3 beats of the harmonic rhythm, he'll have a first inversion and a root position version of each chord, and he'll separate it with a chord in first inversion. You see this a lot with tonics and a 7 chord, just like what's happening here. If we were thinking in terms of the key of F major here, this would be 1-6, 7-6, 1. But we're in the key of B flat, so it's veiled a little bit. But that's a very common progression in Bach's music. And 1-6-4 going to 5 is a progression as well, but we typically see them share a bass. But if you think of this phrase as a larger figure, it kind of does keep the same bass. Alright, then we get E flat, C, G, and C, which is a first inversion 2 chord, C minor, and I think this is our gateway back to the key of G minor. Actually, it's a 4-6 chord in the key of G minor as well, but we've seen this idea of a triad going from 1 to 2 as well, or 5. Sorry, I was confusing this. I flipped this around. I thought we saw 5 going to 2 previously, but no, it's interesting that we have 5 going to 2 though. We typically expect 2 to go to 5. Just because of the nature of the cycle of fifths. But regardless, that 2 is being recontextualized as 4 in the key of G minor, and we're getting ready for our cadence. So we have D, D, G, and B flat, which is our tonic triad G minor in a second inversion. Neighbor tone in the bass. We then get D, D, F sharp, and A, which is a D major triad in root position, just a 5 chord. So this is typically how we would expect a 1-6-4 going to a 5. They share a bass, which is what makes them related with this bracket. But here they don't share a bass, but it's still 1-6-4 going to 5, which is interesting, a little variation. We have a passing 7th in the tenor, and then we have a tonic triad to end the phrase, perfect authentic cadence, G, B flat, D, and G. Okay, next phrase, we get our first modulation. We have an imperfect authentic cadence in the key of F major. We know that one of the contenders for modulation, especially in minor keys, is the subtonic, so going to the flat 7. It's a particularly common destination for Bach as far as modulations are concerned. But we're going to start off by calling this modulation common chord, a common chord modulation underneath this perfect authentic cadence. This G minor is now the supertonic in the key of F. We then get C, C, E, and B flat, which is a C7 chord without the 5th. That's just 5-7. And then we have our tonic triad, F, C, F, and A, which pretty much solidifies the key of F major. We then have G, B flat, E, and G with a passing tone here, and that is E diminished over G, which is 7-6. And notice how we have this linking here of 1, 7, 6, and we would expect to go to 1 here, which creates a really interesting progression actually, because if we redact the rest of the phrase and we just spell on that downbeat, we have A, C sharp, and F, which is F augmented, which is interesting, but I think if we contextualize this and look at the bigger picture, really what we're looking at is C, C sharp, E, and G, which is a deceptive progression for sure, because we would expect this 7-6 chord to go to 1, but instead it's going to 5-7 of 6. A is the dominant of D, and D is our submediate in the key of F. And then we get another deceptive progression. Instead of going to D minor, if you look at the top 3 voices, we actually get, a D minor sonority. We get D, D, and F, which for all intents and purposes I would expect to be fully contextualized with another D in the bass, but no, we get B flat. So this would be the equivalent of 5 going to 6 in the key. Sorry, I wrote 6 because that's what I was saying out loud. This progression right here in the key of D minor is 5-7 going to 6, but in the key of F major, it is 5-7 going to 4. This is one of the first harmonic deviations that we talked about on the channel, and one of the very early chorales that I analyzed. It's a really interesting harmonic progression. We get some passing tones as well. We would expect 4 to go to 4 to be separated by some type of chord. We have C, F, D, and E. But if you look at the C and the E here, it's kind of like separating a 4 chord with a 5 chord, C major. It's just the inner voices are being held, so we can't really analyze this as a full chord. But be mindful of the fact that the voices are sort of implying something in between the lines. Then we have D, B flat, D, and F, which is a B flat major chord in first inversion. And then we get E, C, or E, A, C, and G. I think this A is an accented non-chord tone, and this is just 5-6, C major over E. And then we cadence on F major, F, F, C, and A, which is an authentic cadence, but we don't have the tonic in the melody, so it is imperfect, according to the textbook. And then our last cadence is a perfect authentic cadence in the key of G minor, with the picker D3rd, of course, because this is a chorale in a minor key, and Bach ends on a lighter note. However, I don't think Bach stays in the key of G minor for the entirety of the phrase. I think Bach stays in the, actually goes to G minor via B flat, so I think this F chord is actually 5. And then we get another phrase here, which is interesting, where we have 5 going to 2, kind of like 5 going to 2 here, in the key of B flat. So we've seen this progression before with the E flat, in the bass, just like here, or F going to E flat in the bass is a very similar progression. We have E flat, G, C, and G. This is just a respelling of the same progression. So we have 5 going to 2-6 here. The C minor chord is 2-6. There's an argument to be made that this might be a 7 chord if we take that A into account, but I don't think that that's actually what's happening here. Just because we're starting off with a 5 chord here. But you know what? Maybe 7-4-3 might be what you analyze. They're ultimately achieving the same thing. But because we're not linking 2 tonics together and we're descending, and this is the beginning of the phrase, the dominant doesn't have the same weight in this context. But here we get D, F, D, and B flat, which is our tonic triad in first inversion, 1-6. We've seen this progression before, right? 5-2-1 in the key of G minor. Here we're seeing it in B flat, or we've seen it in B flat here, 5-2-1. But we modulate to G minor in the middle of the phrase, but I don't think we get a modulation for maybe another 2 beats. Then we get C, G, E flat, and C with a passing tone in the melody here. I think actually what's happening is, even though someone might call this a 2 chord, this is actually 7-6 for the same reason why I think it makes more sense that this is a 2 chord here. It makes more sense that this is a 7 chord here. So really it depends on context. And apologies, that A is the chord tone. This G is the non-chord tone. And the reason why I think that that makes sense is because we're linking 2 tonic triads, like I was mentioning before, just like this 5-6 going to 5, via a 7-6 chord. So however Bach chooses to adorn it or to ornament the progression doesn't change the fact that he still likes to link chords together over the harmonic rhythm via a chord that's inverted 1 step or 1 diatonic step below. So he goes to B flat, D, and D. And even though it's not a complete B flat chord, it's still a B flat sonority. And then we get D and F sharp here. It's like he's leaping up to D major, but keeping the B flat there would change it into a B flat augmented chord actually. But I don't think that that's super important. Regardless, this is a 3 chord now in the key of G minor, and I think this is awesome because it goes to E diminished, E, B flat, G, and D. So another 6-7 chord, kind of like how we see here. 3 wants to go to 6 though via the cycle of fifths, so we're seeing it function the way we would expect. We have 4 non-chord tones here, and if you've watched my videos in the past, you know that the light's going off in my head. I'm thinking that we have a modulation, or not a modulation going on. I think we have a passing chord going on. F sharp, A, and C, which is a root position F sharp diminished chord. So 6 going to 7, a little bit of adjacent harmony going on, and we would expect that to go to our tonic triad, right? G, D, G, and B flat, or G, D, B flat, and B flat. So 6, 7, 1. That makes sense. 6 just being a substitute for 4. Then we have some passing tones in the alto and the bass. And then we get E flat, C, G, and C, which is C minor in first inversion, 4-6. Some more passing tones in 3 of the voices. And then we get C, E flat, G, and A. That is A minor 7 flat 5 over C. We know that Bach loves his 2-6-5 chords. We then have D, D, F sharp, and A, which is a 5 chord, D major, passing 7th in the tenor, before we cadence on 1 major, G, B natural, D, and G, which would be a perfect authentic cadence in the key of G minor, or just maybe G in general might be a better way to describe that. But let's talk about the penultimate measure, because there is an instance of what some people call parallel fifths. You have C or D in the tenor going down to C, and then we have A, so let's draw them here. We have D to A and C to G. I don't think that this is really parallel fifths. I mean, if you look at the texture and you look at what's going on, yes, we have D to A, which is a perfect fifth, and then C to G, which is a perfect fifth. So without any context, parallel fifths, that's what's happening. The way that I learned parallel fifths and where I take disagreement, I guess, with the criticism of the perfect fifths, or I don't know if people are really criticizing, but looking for perfect fifths and actual examples are kind of rare. This is happening on a weak beat, and it's the byproduct of a suspension. The A is introduced after the D has already been present, so this is more of like a 6/5 suspension that then resolves down as well. So even though the tenor steps down at the same time that the alto steps down, the first fifth in the series is only heard very briefly, and on that same note, the second fifth is heard very, very briefly as well, as he quickly reverses course back up to F, or to D, apologies. I think all in all, when I think of parallel fifths, I think about two consecutive fifths that share the same harmonic rhythmic weight. So we have a fifth here that's happening on the and it's a byproduct of the fifth being introduced after the fact. And then we get a fifth on the strong beat afterwards. And I don't think that that's the same perfect fifth that you would have marked off on your harmony homework. I think a perfect fifth would be like if this downbeat had D and A, and then this downbeat had C and G. I think that would be a perfect fifth in the way that the textbook criticizes, or the textbook tells you to avoid if you're writing in this style. But regardless, here it is. Some people say that this is perfect fifths. I say that as far as perfect fifths are concerned, this is more of a byproduct of counterpoint and not of, strict harmorhythmic writing. So I think Bach gets a pass. But I thought that I would point that out because a couple of places I looked talked about them at length, and I had some disagreements. I had some agreements, but I figured seeing parallel fifths in some proximity is interesting. But that will conclude today's analysis. I hope you enjoyed the video. We saw some interesting progressions today, saw some interesting modulations today, and saw an instance of parallel fifths. An interesting chorale for sure. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for continuing to support the channel as well. I really enjoy the fact that people have been following me along in this journey. There are tons of videos in the future, or they're scheduled for the future, so make sure to stay tuned if you're interested in an analysis, and if you want to analyze along with me. It's been a really fun journey so far, and I look forward to the rest of it. I hope you take care.